Steve Greenhouse.
Thank you. Whoops. Thank you, May. What just happened? May's been fighting the good fight for many years. For my book, I've been doing a little research on labor history, and there was, in New York City in 1909, there was one of the great strikes in American history, the uprising of the 20,000, where 20,000 almost exclusively female workers went on strike over 60-hour weeks and having to pay for their needles, and the police beat them up and hired prostitutes to beat them, and the companies hired prostitutes to beat them up, and I'd say the union won 4/5 of the issues, did not get a closed shop that it was seeking, and out of that, in 1909, grew May's union local at the ILGWU, and it's an amazing story, that strike, and it kind of shows that la luta continua, that the fight continues for many, many years. I'm reading this very good book about Francis Perkins, the labor secretary under Roosevelt and the nation's very first cabinet secretary, and talks a lot about the National Consumers League, which was founded by a great woman named Florence Kelley. And the National Consumers League wasn't really a consumer group so much as an anti-sweatshop, anti-child labor group. And back 105 years ago, it was a really prominent force in the United States of America. And when we talk about sweatshops now in global supply chain, I often wonder, why is there nothing in the United States really like the National Consumer League? Judy very much tries to do that, and she does a good job, but as good as the work of your group is, it still doesn't have the prominence of the National Consumer League. I've never been to Asia, I've never been to Bangladesh, so I sometimes feel weird discussing these issues, and I know people like you and Sarah and Judy know far more about Bangladesh than I do, and you've visited numerous times. But I'll try to give some perspective. So I had the labor debate at the New York Times for 19 years, and going back to the mid-1990s, I started writing about overseas sweatshop labor. Charlie Kernighan was really a pioneer in exposing gaps using 13 and 14 and 15-year-old workers in Honduras. And then there were a lot of revelations about Nike in Vietnam, where the managers actually beat up some workers when they weren't happy with how the workers were. And then just a few blocks from here, there's a factory making products for Kathy Lee Gifford with, paying workers much less than the minimum wage, making them work incredible hours. And that factory is producing the Kathy Lee Gifford label for Walmart. So this has been going on for a very long time. And Gap and Nike and Waze in many ways have improved. The conditions are better at many of their overseas factories, but many of these factories are still not nearly good enough. And I think the whole issue of supply chains, labor rights, labor conditions overseas, it's really like one step forward and one step back, maybe two steps back. And I once tried persuading my editors at the New York Times to say, they wanted ideas for stories about Bangladesh, and I said, Bangladesh is kind of the logical consequence of globalization. One talks about the race to the bottom. And, the garment industry, and I think one of the reasons there's so many scandals in the garment industry is that it takes very little, it's extremely mobile, and it takes very little capital to set up a factory. So like almost anyone can get into it and can get out of it easily without paying their workers. A lot of these people want to make a quick buck. And once the multi-fiber agreement ended that set quotas, around the world for, what each country can produce and ship to other countries. Once that ended, that really accelerated this race to the bottom, this race to find the cheapest places in the world to manufacture garments. And Bangladesh, in many ways, made great sense to the industry because it had, probably the lowest wages in the world. It had, very, very bad. I got to be careful here. It was very underregulated. and the government seemed to bend over backwards to, I'm speaking at a conference next week where a lot of Bangladesh officials are going to be, so I got to be careful. Where Bangladesh officials kind of bent over backwards to do the industry's bidding, and many members of the garment industry are in the Bangladeshi parliament, right, and have inordinate say. So, so Bangladesh became, the tiny little Bangladesh became a real garment industry giant. And unfortunately, when you have this race to the bottom, and the place that's at the very bottom, unfortunately, there are going to be a lot of disasters. And it was really heartbreaking, horrendous, tragic that there was the Tazreen fire in November 2012 where 112 workers died, and we thought that was humongously bad, and this should never happen again. And then 5 months later, there's the Tazreen factory collapse, where 1,129, at least 1,129 workers died, and that was, one of the very worst tragedies in industrial history, the worst tragedy in the garment industry. And I kept thinking, so I'm reading this book on Frances Perkins, and at the moment of when the Triangle Fire started, just east of Washington Square, she was having tea with some ladies on Washington Square North, and she heard all the commotion, and she ran over to the Triangle Fire, and she saw people literally, jumping out of the windows. And later, when she was essentially labor commissioner for Governor Al Smith and for Governor Franklin Delano Roosevelt and then labor secretary for Franklin Delano Roosevelt, she really pushed very, very hard to improve factory safety. And she saw that in Triangle Fire, the fire department ladders only went 7 stories high, and the people were jumping out of the ninth, and the fire was in the 8th, 9th, and 10th floor, and people were jumping out of the ninth floor windows. Dozens and dozens of people jumping to their deaths. And so, fast forwarding back to Tazreen. So when Jim Yardley, our correspondent in New Delhi, and I were investigating what caused the Tazreen fire and why there were so many deaths, I was kind of, disappointed, shocked to see that they didn't even have fire escapes. And we were doing a story, and we got a copy of some factory monitoring reports of Tazreen, and this company UL Verification Services was the company that did the monitoring, and it found a few partially blocked exit routes, an absence of battery-powered backup emergency lights in case of power failure, 3 exit doors on the open inward. Doors in factories are supposed to open outward because if people are trying to get out in a fire, you don't want to. Anyway, so I interviewed the head of UL Verification Services, and this really shocked me. And I said, weren't you concerned that there weren't fire escapes? Weren't you concerned that there weren't fire doors? And the head of UL Verification Services, Sajeev Jasudis, said, we don't inspect for fire escapes. We don't inspect for fireproof stairways. That's the responsibility of the local building code inspector. And those of you who have been to Bangladesh, unlike me, know that Bangladesh's building inspectors, fire inspectors, staff are way, way, way understaffed, and not nearly, at least before Tazreen and Rana Plaza, were not nearly vigorous enough. And I was just shocked that here we were 111, 112, 113, 114 years after Triangle Fire, and we have this same incredibly bad, screwed up standards. No fire escapes, no fire doors. And here in the United States, for decades, there have been requirements of sprinklers in many in multi-story factories. And I don't think any factories in Bangladesh had sprinklers. Now they're finally starting. I did the story in December with Jeff Hermanson and Scott Nova helped me on this. There's a factory in Chittagong in Bangladesh called, several factories, sister factories, called the Azim Group, which is a huge garment conglomerate in Bangladesh with like 27,000 workers. And at these 2 sister factories in Chittagong, one of them, the acting head of the labor union, Mira Boshak, she left work one night and like 1910 and 19, and you know, how to lie to the inspectors. So, you know, or Heerden said, you know, you go, say you, and he, factory inspectors come once a year. You got to get to work. If you don't, you're going to be fired. These people who didn't work that day report and killed. The decade.
Mixed bag of how much they know about what's happening. Tend to know Garment Manufacturers Association manager. She needed that federation rep.
Nobody really knows the alliance, which are initiatives of brands and retailers. Look at what kinds of accepting for. They test factories. Factories are small, but most of the brands accessibility for the solution for big factories, despite the fact that we work in small. And
taking lessons from tragedies, but also taking lessons from our victories. So our union, there 100 years ago, if we think that after the housework, which is kind of the worst symptom, did those agree? It also said that wages kind of unimaginable in the current reality. Corporate union work with guarantees were very involved. By saying my experience is totally to the contrary. Workers and garment workers unions in many countries now have 2 decades of experience working with these kinds of companies. They understand the role of the brands. They I can't overstate the importance of Skype and other technologies for workers to be able to share what's going on across continents, across hemispheres, and that's happening more and more. And specifically within industrial, which is the global, there's recently a and is now a concerns haven't clearly fixed in this industry.
Industry heavily relies on the poverty wages to boost their profit margins. Working condition small Prime Minister fund to be distributed to the garments worker of Rana Plaza, who is then that claim kind of Rana Plaza fund. Go and then see right after Rana Plaza, government came out the idea that you guys donate to that fund, and then we are gonna distribute garments worker. In 2 years, they came out to the press and said that there is no for the Rana Plaza because those. So over here we work for like the maternity leave and basic working right on all over. About like a leave and then payment on leave. One story, baby came out. Baby was.
I didn't phone up here, so can I ask Karen how much time? So, the willingness, unwillingness, I all on.
So the thing that they are asking us is to come out sort of argument. Also want to report that NYU really does the use side. saying how detrimental is.
All right. You want to
Thanks.
Yeah.
Our primary manufacturers. And that neither about the subcontract. So I stand by our analysis and really stand by our concern for the safety of all workplaces and all workers.
Other comments? Yeah, Judy?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to jump in there, and I appreciate your comments, because I think what he's pointing out is the very practical impact. You know, I know you say it's an academic report, changes the accord.
Magisterial, and I would hope that live successor that is the Grameen Bank. And if
mind are criminal. And I'm wondering what has been made to reform the governance.
Yeah, and then I'm going to...
They were trying to help workers in brands